Beyond the Ditch. The story you are about to read is not an invention, but an echo. It is drawn from the life of a real person and inspired by the true, harrowing events of a journey that tested the limits of human endurance. While this narrative is shaped by the craft of fiction, the foundation upon which it is built, the desperation, the sacrifice, and the unyielding will to step beyond the shadows of the past, is true. This is one man's passage, a testament to the profound cost of a new beginning and the resilience it takes to build a life beyond the ditch. Chapter 1. The Weight of a Dream, the American Dream. In the working-class apartments of Tekirdağ's industrial city, Çerkezköy, it was a myth whispered with a mix of reverence and desperation. It was spoken about during tired tea breaks on factory floors, a fantasy discussed over meager family dinners. It wasn't just a place, it was an escape from the crushing inflation that made a week's wages disappear in a day, from the suffocating fear that your children's future would be smaller and harder than your own. For Yalcin, this dream was a ghost that haunted his waking hours. He was a good man, a husband, a father of 2 beautiful girls. One a bright, curious 4-year-old, the other a 6-month-old infant whose new baby smell still clung to his work clothes. He loved them with a fierceness that ached. But love couldn't pay the rent. Love couldn't stop the cold dread that settled in his stomach every time he passed a grocery store. The path to this dream was guarded by gatekeepers, the schemers. They were men who spoke in low tones, their networks stretching from the industrial zones of Thrace to the banks of the Rio Grande. Their price was $12,000. Yalcin had scoffed when he first heard the sum. It was an astronomical figure, a king's ransom. It might as well have been $1 million. He was a factory worker, not a tycoon. He had resigned himself to his fate. He would stay, he would struggle, and he would find a way to survive, just as his father had before him. But his father had not resigned. The old man saw the same struggles, the same shrinking horizons, and he could not bear to watch his sons tread water in a sinking economy. The family had lived apart for years, Yalcin with his own small family, his younger brother still at home. But the bond of responsibility remained. "You can't go," his father had said one evening, the words heavy and final. "You have your girls." Your wife Yalcin felt a strange mix of relief and shame. "I know, Baba. There is no money anyway. I will find the money," his father declared, a grim set to his jaw. "We will send your brother." The words landed like a stone in the quiet room. Yalcin's brother, barely 18 years old, a boy whose entire existence had been a sheltered triangle between his school, his home, and the local mosque. He was a good boy, respectful and quiet, but he knew nothing of the world's cruelty. He had never been in a fistfight, never navigated a strange city, never had to lie or run to survive. His eyes were clear, unburdened by the cynicism that life beats into a man. "Baba, he's just a child," Yalcin protested, his voice low. "He isn't ready. This journey, it's not for him. Readiness is a luxury we don't have," his father shot back, his voice cracking with a rare show of desperation. "He will go. I will find a way," and he did. The old man embarked on a humiliating pilgrimage of debt. He borrowed from his shopkeeper, from old friends he hadn't spoken to in years, from distant relatives who looked at him with pity. He scraped together enough, not for the full $12,000, but for the down payment for the plane ticket that would set the entire, irreversible ordeal in motion. The ticket was not to New York or Los Angeles. It was to Mexico. The day of departure felt like a funeral. The drive from Çerkezköy to the massive, indifferent Istanbul airport was thick with unspoken fear. Yalcin's mother was a silent, weeping shadow in the car, clutching her youngest son's arm as if she could physically hold him back from the fate they had chosen for him. The boy himself was a picture of nervous excitement, the true danger of his path completely obscured by the youthful fantasy of adventure. He was worried about the long flight, not the cartel checkpoints. At the terminal gate, Yalcin pulled his brother into a hard embrace. "Be smart," he whispered, his throat tight. "Trust no one. Call us. The second you get to the hotel, you call. I will, don't worry," the boy said, smiling, but his eyes darted nervously. Yalcin watched him walk through security, a thin backpack on his shoulders, looking small and terribly alone against the backdrop of the massive international terminal. He watched until his brother was just a figure merging with the crowd, a sacrifice offered to the family's hope. The plane took off, carrying the most innocent part of their family to the most dangerous part of the world. Yalcin drove the long, quiet road back to Cherkasskoy, the silence in the car filled with a cold, creeping dread. The gamble had been made. Now all they could do was wait by the phone and pray. Chapter 2. The Shattered Call. For 2 days, the small apartment in Cherkasskoy was a vacuum of anxiety. Life moved in muted tones. Yalcin went to the factory, his hands moving automatically, his mind thousands of miles and an ocean away. His mother prayed, her lips moving silently over her prayer beads. His father sat staring at the old television, seeing nothing. Every ring of the landline, every buzz of a cell phone sent a jolt of electricity through them. Then, the call came. "He's there," Yalcin's father announced, his voice thick with a relief so profound it was almost a sob. They crowded around the phone. The boy's voice was thin, crackling with distance, but it was his. He had landed. He had made it through the airport. He was in the hotel the schemers had arranged. "It was scary," he told Yalcin, "but I'm okay. The men are here. We wait, and then we go tomorrow, I think." When Yalcin hung up, the tension broke. His mother wept, but this time from relief. His father clapped him on the back, a small, proud smile returning to his face. "He'll do it," he said, his confidence restored. "He's a strong boy." That night, Yalcin slept soundly for the first time in weeks. He allowed himself to imagine his brother in America, working, building a new life. He allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, this impossible gamble would pay off. The fragile peace lasted 36 hours. The next call was not a hopeful check-in. It was a frantic, choked sound from a number they didn't recognize. "Yalcin?" It was his brother, but the voice was wrong. The thin, youthful tone was gone, replaced by a raw, broken rasp that clawed at Yalcin's nerves. "What is it? What happened? Are you hurt?" Yalcin demanded, gripping the phone, his other hand signaling frantically to his parents. "They took us," the boy sobbed, the words tumbling out in a torrent of panic. "The police. The real police, Abby. Not the ones the Sebakechi paid. They kicked the doors in. Guns. They put guns to our heads. They took us all." Yalcin felt the blood drain from his face. "Where are you? Are you in jail?" "I was," his brother cried. 4 days. 4 days in that place. It wasn't a jail, it was a hole. They scared us, Abby. They said they would give us to the cartel. They said we would disappear. They kept yelling." He choked on a sob, unable to continue. Yalcin could hear it all in the spaces between his words, the smell of the cell, the hardened faces of other prisoners, the absolute terror of an 18-year-old boy who had never even seen the inside of a principal's office, now trapped in a foreign prison with the threat of being handed over to monsters. "They let you go? You're out? Where are you now?" "Yes, they let us go. I don't know why, they just kicked us out onto the street. I have nothing. My bag is gone. My money." His voice broke again. I can't go. I'm not like you. I can't do this." Yalcin closed his eyes. The image of his brother, alone and terrified on a Mexican street, was a physical weight on his chest. "I want to come home," the boy whispered. the last of his bravado dissolving into the simple, desperate plea of a child. "Please, father. I just want to come home." Yalcin looked at his father. The old man's face, which had been so proud 2 days before, was now a mask of grey shame. He had sent a lamb into a den of wolves. He nodded slowly, his eyes defeated. "Okay," Yalcin said, his own voice heavy. "Okay, little brother. Come home. Just get to the airport. We will find the money for a ticket. Just come home." He hung up the phone, and the silence that returned to the apartment was heavier than before. It was no longer the silence of anxiety. It was the silence of failure, of debt, and of a dream that had just died a violent, costly death. Chapter 3. The Father's Gamble. The phone call had landed like a judgment. Yalcin's brother was coming home, but the silence he left behind was filled with the deafening sound of failure. The dream was dead, but the debt was very much alive, and it had been paid for nothing. There was one more call to make. Yalcin's father, his face a mask of grey stone, made it. He had to face the schemers. They met in a sparse backroom office in Cherkasskoy, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap tea. The smuggler was not a sympathetic man. He was a businessman whose product was human hope, and the transaction had failed. "He's a child," Yalcin's father began, his voice pleading. He was terrified. The police are a risk. The cartel is a risk. The river is a risk." The smuggler cut him off, his voice flat. He took a long drag from his cigarette. "It's all part of the price. The money is gone. Paid to the contacts in Mexico City, paid to the men at the hotel, paid to the driver. It doesn't come back because a boy gets scared." A hot, dark anger rose in Yalcin's chest. He was in a Mexican jail for 4 days. "He was lucky it was only 4 days, the smuggler said, looking at Yalcin for the first time, his eyes cold and appraising. Then he turned back to the father. "This was your mistake, old man," he said, not unkindly, but as a simple statement of fact. "You sent a lamb to do a lion's job." When his older brother was right here, the words hung in the air, a public shaming that struck Yalcin's father harder than a physical blow. The old man flinched, his shoulders slumping. He had gambled with the wrong son. Yalcin stood up. "How much to send me?" The smuggler smiled, a small, tight twist of his lips. The $12,000 was gone. That was the price for the brother's failure. But he was willing to make a new arrangement. He saw the steel in Yalcin's eyes, the broad shoulders of a man who worked with his hands, the quiet desperation of a father. This one wouldn't turn back. "The main fee is paid in failure," the smuggler said, "but you'll need new transport, new guides, a new flight. I'll get you in the next group. You just pay for the new ticket." That's the deal. The decision was made before they even left the office. It wasn't a choice. It was a consequence. Yalcin was now the only way to reclaim the family's honor, to erase the massive, suffocating debt that now had zero chance of being repaid. The speed of it was dizzying. Before his little brother's plane had even touched down in Istanbul, before Yalcin could even look him in the eye and hear the warnings firsthand, his own ticket was booked. June 19th, 2022. The days leading up to his departure were a blur of agonizing lasts. He watched his 4-year-old daughter play, trying to memorize the exact sound of her laughter, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. How do you explain to a child that you are leaving and you don't know when or if you will be back? You don't. You lie. You tell her, "Father is going on a long trip for work," and you fight back the knot in your throat when she asks, "Will you be back for my birthday?" The hardest part was the baby, his 6-month-old. She was pure, innocent life. He held her against his chest for hours, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, her head tucked under his chin. He was leaving her. He was abandoning his wife to raise 2 children alone while he chased a phantom. The economic desperation had to be stronger than the guilt. It had to be. He held his wife in the pre-dawn darkness of their apartment. "I will send for you," he whispered, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "Just stay alive, Yalcin," she whispered back, her voice breaking. "Just stay alive." On June 19th, he met the 5 other men from his town who were part of the same group. They were a small band of hopefuls, 5 other husbands and sons, each carrying his own story of debt and desperation. They shook hands, their smiles tight with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. At Istanbul airport, they walked through the same gates his brother had. But where his brother had been filled with a naive boy's excitement, this group was quiet, sober. They were men, not boys, and they knew what they were risking. The 18-hour flight was a timeless void. They were suspended between the world they had left and the terrifying unknown they were flying toward. There was no turning back. As the plane began its long descent into the smog and sprawl of Mexico City, Yalcin looked out the window. He wasn't filled with hope. He was filled with a cold, hard resolve. He would not fail. He could not. Chapter 4. The First Shakedown. The plane's wheels hit the tarmac in Mexico City with a hard, unforgiving thud. It was a sound of finality. There was no going back. Yalcin and his 5 companions from Turkish exchanged nervous glances. The bravado they had tried to muster during the 18-hour flight, the shared jokes, the quiet assurances, had evaporated, replaced by a thick, silent apprehension. They were now on enemy soil. The air in the terminal was hot, heavy, and loud with a language that felt aggressive and impenetrable. They moved as a single unit, a tight knot of 6 men trying to look inconspicuous and failing spectacularly. They approached the passport control booths, their hearts hammering. This was the first test. The schemers had said there would be help. A uniformed officer looked up, his eyes scanning the line. He spotted them instantly. They were too pale, too Turkish, too terrified. He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his head, directing them to a separate closed-off kiosk. By transferring it to another counter, Yalcin's source had mentioned this. They shuffled over, passports in hand. The officer didn't look at their faces. He took the passports, stamped them with a mechanical, indifferent thud, 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 and pushed them back. No questions. No welcome to Mexico. They were not tourists. They were cargo, processed and pushed through. They stepped out of the air conditioning and into the cauldron. The smog and the noise of Mexico City hit them like a physical blow. They huddled on the curb, a tiny, vulnerable island of men. "The hotel," one of them said, holding a scrap of paper with an address. "We get a taxi." A driver, his eyes sharp and practiced, spotted them immediately. He knew their kind. He saw the desperation, the new off-the-plane fear, the hidden wads of American dollars. He smiled a wide, predatory smile. "Hotel? Si, si, amigos." "I take you," relief washed over them. They piled into the van, grateful for the small, temporary sanctuary. The ride was short, weaving through chaotic traffic for no more than 15 minutes before pulling up to a nondescript, slightly run-down hotel. The driver turned around, his smile gone. $80, one of Yalcin's friends scoffed, pulling out his wallet. No, $80 for all. The driver's expression hardened. He held up a single finger. $80 cada uno. Each A ripple of disbelief and anger went through the group. "That's crazy." "It was a $5 ride." "We won't pay." The driver didn't argue. He simply tapped his finger on the glass of his window, pointing to a pair of federales, federal police, standing on the corner, their hands resting on their sidearms. The message was brutally clear. "Pay me, or I hand you over to them, and they will take everything." They were powerless. They had been in the country for less than 30 minutes. Swallowing their rage, they emptied their pockets. Each man handed over $80, $480 for a $5 ride. The smugglers' $12,000 had just been the entry fee. The real price, Yalcin realized, would be extracted from them in 1,000 small, humiliating cuts. They grabbed their bags and walked into the dim, bleach-smelling lobby. A thin man with a clipboard was waiting. He looked them over, his eyes as cold as the passport officers. He found their names, ticked them off. Then he pointed to Yalcin. Your schema is different. You come with me. He gestured to the other 5. You all wait here. Your group is separate. A cold spike of panic shot through Yalcin. No, he said, his voice quiet. We are together. We are from the same town. The man shrugged, indifferent. Your payment is with another group. You go with them. He jerked his thumb toward a dark corner of the lobby. Yalcin looked. Huddled on hard plastic chairs was a collection of strangers. He saw dark-skinned men who looked Central American, a few who looked Afghan, and others he couldn't place. All of them shared the same haunted, hollow-eyed stare. The real hardship was starting now. The thin, fragile safety net of his 5 friends, the only familiar thing in this entire alien world, was ripped away in an instant. He wasn't part of a group of friends anymore. He was alone, just another anonymous soul being trafficked. He looked back at his friends from Turkish. They looked back at him, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They couldn't help him. You wait here, the man ordered Yalcin. You leave in 8 hours. Yalcin shouldered his small bag, walked over to the corner and sat down, his back against the wall. He was no longer Yalcin, the father, the husband, the man from Turkish. He was just a body waiting to be moved. Chapter 5. The Highway of Extortion. The 8 hours in the dim corner of the hotel lobby felt like an eternity. Yalcin was surrounded by strangers, all united by the common language of fear. No one spoke. Each was lost in his own silent terror. His friends from Turkish had been taken elsewhere in the hotel. He was, definitively, alone. Finally, the handler with the clipboard returned. He glanced at his list, then jerked his head at the group. It's time. To Juarez. They were going to the border, to the legendary, dangerous city that sat directly opposite El Paso, Texas. They were herded into a van and driven back to the airport, this time to a loud, chaotic domestic terminal, a world away from the gleaming international wing. Tickets were thrust into their hands. As Yalcin boarded the flight, he felt his stomach clench. This flight was the last step from civilization into the unknown. When they landed in Juarez, the air felt different, drier, hotter, and charged with a palpable sense of danger. As they stepped outside, a swarm of taxi drivers descended on them like vultures. The handler pointed them toward a specific van. The driver looked them over, smiled, and spoke in a mix of broken English and Spanish. El Paso, the border, 7-hour drive. He then named his price, $300. Cada uno. Each A curse died in Yalcin's throat. After the $80 shakedown, now this. Someone in the group started to argue. That's robbery. This is a cheap ride. The driver just shrugged. Then stay here, amigo. We'll see who finds you first. The federales or the sicarios. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a demand. The money was collected, counted into the driver's hand. The van lurched to life and headed out of the city into the vast, unending expanse of the Chihuahuan Desert. The journey was 7 hours of bone-jarring vibration, dust, and tense silence. Yalcin stared out the window, thinking of his daughters. He was enduring this humiliation for the sake of their faces. About 3 hours in, they saw the flashing blue and red lights ahead. Mexican police. A roadblock. The driver slowed to a stop and cheerfully rolled down his window. A police officer walked over slowly, his face impassive. He took a long look at the passengers, at the cargo of exhausted, terrified men. He spoke briefly to the driver in Spanish, then held out his hand. The driver turned around. Tax time, he said without a trace of shame. $100, each man. Now, but we paid you, someone yelled. You paid me, the driver agreed. You didn't pay them. You pay, or we all get taken. The threat was clear. Yalcin remembered his brother's story. If you resist, they take you to jail or send you back to Turkey. Or they hand you over to the cartels. Again, they dug into their pockets. The money was collected, folded, and passed out the window. The officer took it, stuffed it into his pocket without counting, and waved them on. The van sped up. Yalcin's blood was boiling. He felt robbed, humiliated. But the ordeal wasn't over. 2 hours later, another checkpoint. A different set of uniforms, but the exact same script. The same bored looks, the same outstretched hand, the same price. $100. Each in total on a single 7-hour ride. They had been bled for $500 per person in bribes and fees. The $12,000 paid to the Sebekechi, Yalcin now understood, was just the cover charge to enter this corrupt ecosystem. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert in hues of orange and purple, the van finally slowed. It didn't pull into a city or up to a house. It pulled over onto a desolate patch of dirt on the side of the highway. The driver killed the engine and turned around. "We're here," he said. "Get out." Chapter 6. The Ditch. Out. Now the driver's voice was sharp, urgent. Yalcin and the others tumbled out of the van onto the loose gravel. The air was cool, the sun a dying ember on the horizon. They were in the middle of nowhere, just a dark 2-lane highway stretching into infinity in both directions, flanked by desert scrub. The driver pointed into the darkness on the other side of the road. "You see that hill?" he said, his voice low. "You will cross the highway. You will climb that hill. On the other side, you run." He stepped closer, his face grim. "It is 1 kilometer. You do not stop. You do not slow down. You run. At the end is a large ditch, full of water. That is the border. You cross it." He grabbed the arm of the man closest to him. "Listen to me. The Policía de Mexico patrol this road. If they catch you here," he squeezed the man's arm, "they have orders. They can kill you. No questions asked. You understand? They will shoot a cold electric shock of pure terror pass through the group. This wasn't about bribes anymore. This was about survival." "Wait for no cars," the driver ordered. "Go." There was no time to think. They sprinted across the dark highway, the beams of a distant truck sweeping toward them. They scrambled up the loose scree of the hill, rocks slipping under their feet. At the top, they paused for half a second. Before them was a flat, dark expanse of brushland. And at the far end, perhaps a kilometer away, they could just make out a deeper shadow, a cut in the earth. The ditch. "Run!" someone screamed. They ran. It was a desperate, panicked sprint. Their lungs burned. The only sounds were their own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of boots on the hard desert soil. They were a pack of hunted animals running from a predator they couldn't see. Then they heard it, the high-pitched whine of an engine. Yalcin chanced to look over his shoulder. Headlights. A patrol truck off-road bouncing over the terrain, coming for them, and coming fast. "Policía! Alto!" The shout was followed by the cold metallic clack-clack of a round being chambered into a rifle. "They're here! Go! Go! Go!" The group broke apart in pure animal panic. All pretense of order was gone. They were no longer men. They were just raw fear, running for their lives. The ditch was close now, just 50 meters. The truck was gaining, its headlights pinning them like fleeing rabbits. "Into the water!" One by one, the men in front of Yalcin launched themselves into the darkness, followed by the sound of a heavy, desperate splash. Yalcin was right behind them. The bank of the ditch was 1 step away. He gathered himself to leap, a hand clamped onto his shoulder like a steel trap. He was spun around. A Mexican police officer, his face contorted in rage, had him. The ditch, the border, safety, America, was literally 1 footstep behind him. But he was caught. As the officer grabbed him, Yalcin's survival instinct took over. He didn't try to pull away. He lunged forward. He wrapped one arm around the officer's neck, his other hand instinctively grabbing the man's holstered sidearm, not to pull it but to hold on, to make himself part of the officer. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the second officer leaping from the truck, running toward them. His mind went crystal clear. 2 officers meant he was finished. He would be beaten, arrested, or worse. He had one chance. One. My only option was to grab the cop and throw us both into the water. With a desperate primal roar, Yalcin tightened his grip on the officer's collar and the gun. He didn't push. He fell, using his entire body weight to pull the larger man off balance. For a split second, they were suspended, a tangle of limbs on the crumbling edge. Then, together, they crashed into the water. The cold was a violent shock. They went under, swallowing the muddy, foul-tasting water. The force of the fall and the powerful current of the ditch — this was no ditch, it was the Rio Grande — tore the officer's grip from his shoulder. Yalcin kicked, his legs burning. He broke the surface, gasping, and scrambled at the opposite bank. It was steep, slick with mud. He clawed at the dirt, his fingers finding a root. He hauled himself up, half crawling, half falling, and collapsed onto the bank. He was covered in mud, soaking wet, and his heart felt like it would explode. He rolled onto his back, sucking in the air. He was on American soil. From the other side of the river he heard shouting. The second officer was at the water's edge, his gun drawn but pointed at the sky. His partner was sputtering, trying to climb back up the Mexican side. "Hey, Venacar!" the officer yelled, waving his arm. "Come back! Come back here!" Yalcin just lay there, panting. He had no strength to get up. He looked at the furious, helpless officer across the water. A deep, shuddering breath filled his lungs. It was the first clean breath he had taken since leaving Turkish. He was in America, and they could no longer touch him. Chapter 7. The Price of the Dream. Yalcin lay on the muddy bank of the Rio Grande, his chest heaving for what felt like an hour. He was an island of soaking, trembling humanity in the vast Texas dark. The shouts of the Mexican police faded behind him, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the pounding of his own heart. He was here. He had made it, but he was not yet free. Eventually, the blue and white lights of the US Border Patrol swept over him. There was no aggression in their approach, just a weary, bureaucratic efficiency. "On your feet," one of the agents said, his voice devoid of emotion. Yalcin was processed with the rest of his group, who had been rounded up nearby. The first step was a humiliation that felt almost ritualistic. They were taken to a room and told to strip. Anadan Doma, Yalcin would later recall. Stark naked. They were ordered to shower, a cold antiseptic spray that washed off the Rio Grande mud, but not the grime of the journey. They were handed grey sweatpants, t-shirts, and thin slippers. Their old lives, their clothes, their identities were stuffed into a plastic bag. Then came the questions, the photographs, the fingerprinting. They were numbers in a system. He was placed in a large, cold holding cell in Texas, the cell block. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of sterile cold and gnawing hunger. They were given nothing but apples and water. For 6 days, Yalcin survived on this, the acid from the apples eating at his empty stomach, his hope beginning to curdle into a new kind of despair. This wasn't the America he had dreamed of. This was just a cleaner, colder prison. On the 6th day, a guard called his name. A jolt of pure joy shot through him. "I'm being released." He was wrong. He and 30 other men were shackled, not just handcuffs. They were chained at the wrists, at the waist, and at the ankles. The cold steel bit into his skin. "This," he thought, his stomach dropping, "is for criminals." They were herded onto a bus, the chains clinking with every movement. For 6 agonizing hours they drove, the metal cutting into their flesh. They arrived at a military airfield, a place not meant for civilians, and were ordered to wait on the tarmac, still chained, for another 4 hours. The sun beat down on them. They were given no water. Finally, they were loaded onto a cargo plane, the kind used for military transport. The seats were hard metal benches. They were still chained hand to waist, waist to ankle. The flight lasted another 6 hours, a journey of excruciating discomfort. By the time they landed, Yalcin could no longer feel his hands or feet. The steel had become a part of him. They were in Louisiana. The moment they landed, they were moved, without wasting a moment, onto another bus. Another 4-hour drive. The pain was no longer a sharp bite, it was a deep, throbbing, permanent ache. He looked at his fellow prisoners, their faces grey with exhaustion and pain. He cursed himself, he cursed the schemers, he cursed the dream. Why did I come? Why did I leave my children for this? At last, the bus rumbled to a stop. They had arrived at the Louisiana Riverbend Detention Center. The sound of the chains finally being unlocked was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. The relief was so intense, it was almost painful. They were given food, real hot food, and allowed to shower. They were handed a bag filled with hygiene supplies and a fresh set of clothes. It was the first act of basic human dignity they had been shown since stepping on American soil. That camp, a sprawling complex of barbed wire and temporary buildings, became his world. He was no longer Yalcin, the father from Cherkasskoy. He was detainee number A089. One day became a week became a month. The seasons began to change. He watched men come and go, some deported, some released to family. He had no one. He was trapped in a legal limbo, thousands of miles from everyone he loved, his only contact with his wife a few strained, tearful minutes on a monitored phone. He counted the days. 50, 100, 150. He had been a prisoner for 187 days. 6 months after he had thrown himself into the Rio Grande, his name was called again. This time, it was real. A judge had granted him bond. The price for his release, $10,000. It was another impossible sum, but back in Cherkasskoy, his father, shamed but resolute, had not been idle. He had sold his wife's gold. He had borrowed from every soul he knew. He had sold his own small, broken-down car. He scraped together the money and sent it. On a cold winter day, 187 days after his capture, Yalcin walked out of the Louisiana Riverbend Detention Center. He was free. He had nothing but the clothes on his back, a bus ticket to a city he'd never heard of, and a court date, years later. The clatter of machinery and the screech of packing tape fill the air of a vast warehouse in New Jersey. The pace is frantic, the work hard. A forklift, its horn beeping, reverses, and a young man on a pallet jack calls out, "Yalcin, I need a count on aisle 5. 1 minute, a man nods, checking a clipboard. He is fit, his face weathered by work and worry, but his eyes are clear. It is Yalcin. He wears the navy blue polo of a supervisor. His journey here was another story in itself. Months of working under the table for cash, living in crowded rooms, sending every single dollar he earned back to Turkey. First to pay the $10,000 bond. Then to pay his father's original debts. Then to feed his family. His phone buzzes. He pulls it out. It's a photo from his wife. His oldest daughter, now a young girl, is standing in front of a new apartment building in Cherkasskoy, holding a set of keys. She is smiling. He smiles, a deep, genuine smile that reaches his eyes. He has paid for it all. The debt, the smugglers, the bond. He bought the house for his family. He sends money for their clothes, their food, their education. He has saved money. He has built a new life from nothing, just as the dream had promised. Yalcin, my friend. Good work today, Yalcin turns. His manager. The man who gave him his first real job. The man who trusted him. The man for whom this very story is being written, is standing there, clapping him on the shoulder. Thank you, usta, Yalcin says, using the Turkish word for master or mentor, a sign of deep respect. You're the supervisor, Mutlu says, laughing. You're the boss of this floor. But you still call me Usta Yalcin. Just nods, his smile lingering. He looks at his hands, calloused from work, not from chains. He thinks of the ditch, the gun, the officer's face. He thinks of the 187 days in that Louisiana camp. He thinks of the 6-month-old baby he left. He had arrived in America with nothing but the muddy clothes on his back, a refugee from a broken economy. Now he is a supervisor, a provider, a homeowner. He is by every measure the man he had crossed a desert and a river to become. He had paid the price, and he had, against all odds, won. He turns back to the bustling warehouse. "Okay," Yalcin says, clicking his pen. "Back to work."